What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be switching things up quite a bit. I'm excited to brew a Kentucky Common today. I'm also excited to be making this beer today with gear that, from the mash all the way through the fermentation side, cost me in total less than $500. And I'm doing that because I'm going to show you guys in the video that no, you don't need a high-end system like a claw hammer supply system, or you don't need high-end conical fermenters like the CF5 and the Brewbilt X2 that I've got back here. You don't need that stuff to make great beer with. I've always said that, but it's time that I showed that. So that's what we're doing today. I've noticed there really has been a growing trend, especially over the last several years, within homebrewing to focus really hard on the gear aspect of it. Every single year there's a new, shiny stainless steel gadget, some sort of automated brewing system comes out, or you've got, people trying to sell you $10,000 3-vessel systems, or, the latest stainless steel conical fermenter. And you got people who are on Instagram who have, no joke, about $20,000 worth of brewing equipment in their garage or basement. Now that's cool and all, and I'm all for it. Like, if you're fully invested in this hobby and you're obsessed about it, then you do you. Just like any other hobby, this is something you can easily sink your money into. And gear is no exception. But in reality, this hobby is really only about as expensive as you want it to be. But it's been brought to my attention recently that, yeah, I'm kind of part of this problem too. Even if I don't have a fully plumbed, full stainless steel $20,000 setup, I've always thought because I didn't have that I might be excluded from it. But in reality, I'm also kind of excluding a large number of homebrewers that don't have the claw hammer system, which admittedly is getting more expensive now with tariffs and everything else, just like everything else in this hobby. I've always said that the #1 ingredient for making great beer is actually you, the brewer, the person who's actually driving the ship. The gear is helpful. Yes, if you get expensive gear, it's generally going to last you a longer time. It's generally going to make a process a bit more repeatable and controllable perhaps, and it'll probably add some convenience to your life. But that does not necessarily mean it's going to make better beer. You will always be the one to make it. And keeping in mind also that my channel's been pretty much 100% focused on recipe development, you could always take those recipes and apply them to any other brewing system out there. You might have to tweak it anyway, but not everybody uses the exact same gear that I do, and they still have great results using my recipes. So I wouldn't want people to focus on any video of mine that shows the claw hammer system and shows the conical fermenters that I use every so often and say, oh my goodness, that's what I need to make beer. That's like the last thing I'd ever want for you guys to think. And so today we're gonna make that right on this channel. The equipment I'm using today is in total about $488. This is, I recognize, still not a small amount of money, and I'm not blind to the fact that a lot of people still can't afford that. And so I'm gonna say this again to make it explicitly clear. You do not even need this stuff. You can get away with a pot and a stove, some rudimentary temperature control and insulation, and a plastic bucket. And you could do 90% of what we're gonna be doing today. So I'm gonna talk you through some alternative ways to do this. And instead of going through my typical style of grain and glass video here today, I'm gonna kick it back a couple years and we're gonna walk through this and talk through it little piece by little piece. Without further ado, let's break down what we're gonna be doing today. Kentucky Common is one of those beer styles that very, very few people outside of like the homebrewing circle have really heard of. It's one of those beers that makes homebrewing special because homebrewers have kind of kept it alive. In fact, the BJCP style guidelines for this beer list a single commercial example overall, which is pretty crazy because normally there's a list of like 5 or 6 commercial examples for each individual beer style. I was trying really hard to think about when I've tried a Kentucky Common, and I think the only time that I ever managed to drink one was actually at a homebrew conference. Again, homebrewers are kind of the ones championing this style, and I'm really excited to see what happens when I make my own. The BJCP describes Kentucky Common as a clean, dry, refreshing, slightly malty dark beer with high carbonation. It is mild tasting with light toast and caramel flavors, served very fresh as a sessionable saloon beer. Before we jump into this recipe though, I do want to provide a quick shout out to Northern Brewer, who provided all the ingredients for this batch of beer. We're gonna be starting out with 7.5 pounds of Rahr 6-row barley malt. I'm using 6-row, #1, because it's actually the historical style of barley malt that would be used in this type of beer. 6-row barley malt just simply means that the barley stalk itself, where the seeds are, the grains, is kind of like in a star cluster if you looked at it from end on, with 6 individual rows of barley kernels that run up the top of the plant. Two-row barley malt, which we're all familiar with, has 2 rows that are just on opposite sides of the stalk. All things considered, 6-row isn't all that different from 2-row. However, it does have a higher enzymatic content and higher protein content than 2-row does. The next major ingredient that we're going to be adding to the grist is one of the critical parts of this style, and that is a large percentage of corn. We're going to be using flaked corn, in this case, 2 pounds of that for about 20% of the grist. Flaked corn is the simplest and easiest way to incorporate some corn into your brewing. You could use corn grits, you could also cook some corn, gelatinize it that way and add it in, but flaked corn is just ready to go. You can throw it directly into your mash. Those 2 ingredients alone are enough for a nice light cream ale recipe, for example, but we're gonna add some color and some malt complexity to it, as this style is certainly known for. Starting out with a little bit of a crystal malt addition, we're gonna add 4 ounces or a quarter pound of 60 Old Caramel malt from Briess. This is just enough to provide a little bit of sweetness to back up the interesting roast flavors we're adding as well. For the dark malt flavors, we're gonna be adding in 3 ounces each of Briess black malt and Briess chocolate malt. Each of these in low concentrations should provide a nice red color to the beer and also provide some really interesting dark malt notes. And because I'm not adding so much crystal malt, we're trying to keep this beer dry. It should be a nice, refreshing, and highly drinkable, but still interestingly complex beer with the malt bill I got put together here. For the hops in this beer, it's incredibly simple. I'm just gonna be using crystal hops, 1 ounce in the entire beer. Crystal is a very similar hop to something like German Hallertau. It'll provide a nice mild floral and spicy character, very similar to a noble hop, just of course being from the US and being a little bit higher alpha as well. So we're gonna be adding in 3/4 of an ounce of crystal at 60 minutes, and then I'm gonna add that last 1/4 ounce of the single 1 ounce packet in at 10 minutes. For the water profile on this beer, what I'm kind of going for is something that it promotes the high drinkability of the beer, but without making it too dry feeling in the mouth. Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about the water profile composition in this beer if you're trying to make it for yourself. But for the purposes of keeping this one simple and accessible, I just went to the store, grabbed 7 gallons of distilled water, and dumped that into the kettle to start adding my water salts to. And in order to get this exact water profile, all you're gonna be doing is adding in 4 grams of calcium chloride, 2 grams of Epsom salt, and 3 grams of gypsum salts into that 7 gallons of distilled water. And for the yeast in this one, I'm gonna be using a classic strain, the American Ale, California Ale strain, the Chico strain. This is the same strain that is used to make Sierra Nevada beers. It's a classic, clean, high attenuating American ale strain that doesn't produce very many off flavors, but ferments nice and dry and is quite reliable. And I'm gonna be using it in the form of WLP 001, except this is gonna be the dry yeast version of that strain. I'm really pumped that White Labs is starting to release some dry strains now. For the mash on the beer, it's quite simple. It's gonna be 148 degrees for about an hour. You don't need to hold it for the full hour, but the longer you do hold the mash for, the more conversion of starches into sugars you will get, and therefore the higher your original gravity will be, up to a certain limit, of course, being the limit of the amount of starches available to the enzymes in the mash. Bottom line is 30 to 60 minutes at 148, you'll be fine. Before we go ahead and jump into the actual brew day portion of this video, I want to quickly talk about the gear selections for today. For the mash and the boil, I'm going to be utilizing one of the cheapest and most easily found electric brewing systems on the market. And in fact, it's not even a brewing system, it's actually designed more for like distillation. So this is the DigiBoil 35 liter. It runs on 120 volts or 240 volts, depending on what you want to do with it. It can control temperature and it can hold up to 9.5 gallons of liquid. I made that selection because I do truly believe that electric brewing systems are the way of the future for this hobby. More and more people want to be able to brew inside, and they want to brew off of their household wall outlets, and this is certainly something that can do that. The DigiBoil 35 liter costs $199. To take those grains out, we are going to be utilizing a simple brew in a bag bag. These mesh bags are incredibly useful, and they are hands down the cheapest way to get into all grain brewing. They work phenomenally well, and they're reusable. Grand total for this one, $12. DigiBoil is also going to be what we use to boil the beer as well, so no need to get a second vessel for that. We're just gonna pull the bag out, let it drain, and then carry on with the rest of the brew day. If you get further invested in this hobby, it might be useful to purchase a wort chiller for yourself, but for the purposes of this video, I'm gonna show that you don't really need one. I'm actually gonna go ahead and do no chill on this beer. I'm going to send it directly into the fermenter and let it cool down naturally in a fridge. This will probably take almost a full day, maybe overnight. Either way, what we're doing here is just trying to keep it quite simple. And because there's not that many hops in this beer, I'm actually not too concerned about extracting extra bitterness from it by leaving it hot. I've done a handful of no-chill beers in the past and they've all turned out surprisingly good. So I'm pretty confident that this is gonna work out just fine. And when it comes to the fermenter, I'm gonna be using a stainless steel Anvil bucket fermenter, which retails for about $185. I'm gonna be using a fermentation fridge to control the fermentation temperature on this beer. My fermentation fridge is a second-hand chest freezer that I picked up for $50 many years ago, still kicking, and also a $35 Inkbird ITC 308 temperature controller to keep the temperature consistent. That's it. All in all, grand total is $488. So without further ado, let's jump into this brew day. First thing I'm gonna be doing is putting these water salts in. Now that our water is getting up to temperature, they'll dissolve a little bit more readily. The next thing I'm gonna be doing here is milling out all the grain we're gonna be using, except for the flaked corn. The flaked corn does not need to go through the mill. There's no need to use a mill like this one. I have it because I brew so often that it's more convenient for me, but you can always order your grain from an online store already pre-crushed, or you can crush it at your local homebrew shop, as they always have a mill on standby. So now, we're gonna go ahead and mash in. This means adding the grain to the hot water now that it's hit the target strike temperature at 148. I'm gonna add a bunch in at a time and then stir it up pretty well. If you get clumps like that, don't worry, just keep stirring until they break up. So the DigiBoil may not hold temperature just about as well as some of the other higher end electric systems on the market, but it certainly is capable of keeping it in the right place. But one of the coolest things about it is you can actually change the temperature on the fly here, and if I want to step mash, I could totally do that. But today, I'm gonna actually just be raising it all the way up to 170 Fahrenheit, which is a mash out temperature. Mash out basically just means that you're ending the mash, you're denaturing the enzymes, you're locking in your sugar profile. One thing I found though on the homebrew scale is that it really does allow for good drainage of the wort from the grain bag as well as the basket and any other system. So that's why I really do it. It's not fully necessary. You can just pull the grain out and it's fine, but I like to do this just as one of those random things that I just do. Either way, we're gonna get this up to 170 degrees and hold it there for probably about 10 minutes before pulling the bag out. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and pull this bag out. These are typically gonna be a lot heavier than the grain bill when it went in because it's wet, but also keep in mind it's gonna be hot, so I do recommend getting yourself a pair of these brewing gloves to pull it out or use a pulley. But either way, it's just gonna come out and we're gonna let it drain into the wort there for several minutes. Get most of that liquid out. Feel free to squeeze the bag as well. Somehow, at some point when brewing in a bag was becoming popular, somebody decided to say that squeezing the bag to get all this liquid out quicker resulted in tannins being formed in the beer. That has been proven false, so don't fear squeezing the bag. This wort smells really good. So now that I've collected all of my pre-boil wort, which is about 6.5 gallons of wort here, I'm gonna add this. This is FermCap S, which is a defoaming agent. Basically, that's gonna help break some of the surface tension on the bubbles that form during the boil and prevent us from having it boil over, which nobody wants that. Adding a handful of drops into this to help break that surface tension and keep it from going overboard. Basically now, I'm just gonna start slowly bringing this up to a full boil and just keeping an eye on it as it gets closer to that boil. I apologize for the fan noise, but we've officially hit our boil. So now it's time to start the timer and add in our 60-minute bittering edition of, there we go, some Crystal. So 3/4 of an ounce of Crystal going in now. And now I'm gonna start a 50-minute timer because our next edition is gonna be at the 10-minute mark. Okay, so now we're at the 10-minute mark. Almost finished with the boil here. Been boiling for the better part of an hour. It's time to add our 10-minute hop addition, which is this. This is a 1/4 ounce of Crystal. So that's gonna go in now. And at the same time, I'm going to be adding in this, which I add into almost every single brew now. This is a combination of yeast nutrient, 2.5 grams of yeast beer nutrient, and 1 Whirlfloc tablet. Whirlfloc is one of those things that helps a lot of proteins to drop out during the boil, helps a lot of things to come out of solution, and it makes for a clearer beer at the end of the entire process. So I add this into any beer that I consider needs to be clear, or otherwise would benefit from being clear, which ends up being pretty much most of them. We're gonna boil now for about another 10 minutes. Okay, so now we are going to end the boil. As this settles, I'm also gonna pop it up onto the table here, and we're gonna get an OG measurement. So right now, I'm just grabbing an original gravity measurement right after the boil here, just so we can get a good idea of what kind of fermentable sugars we're looking at. So it's obviously boiling hot right now, so we're gonna let this cool off for a little while. Okay, so now we're taking this wort and it's going straight into the fermenter. And one of the reasons why I chose the Anvil bucket fermenter for this particular video is because it's stainless steel. In pretty much every case, you can't take near boiling wort, 192-degree wort, and put it directly into a plastic vessel. It'll melt or it'll leach chemicals into it, and you don't want that. So that's one of the best things about having a relatively affordable stainless steel fermenter. There are also many other things that make the stainless steel bucket style fermenters absolutely fantastic, and that's a different video topic on its own. That being said, we're not going to pitch the yeast on this beer for quite some time. I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it into my chest freezer and get it cooled down to, I would say, about 65 to 67 degrees before I pitch my yeast. One of the absolute worst things you can do is pitch your yeast at a very hot temperature. You can get away with a few degrees here or there, but really if you're pitching your yeast way too hot, it's just asking for off flavors that you can't get rid of, and it's asking for that homebrew flavor to show up in your beer, and nobody wants that. So the brew day is done. We got 5 gallons exactly of wort into the fermenter, and the OG is actually higher than expected. It's a beautiful, beautiful color on that wort, actually. And it came in at 1050. So 1042 at 110 degrees measured, so that's about 1050 for the temperature correction formula on this hydrometer. So that gets us actually about 4 points higher than our predicted OG, which means the efficiency for this particular beer was up around 70% brewhouse efficiency on a brew in the bag system. That's actually really, really good. It's way better than I expected. And that's actually a pretty pleasant surprise, all things considered. Let's see how this hydrometer sample tastes. Yes, I am that guy that drinks hydrometer samples. Little bit of light hop bitterness, a lot of graham cracker and like brown sugar sweetness, and then a nice touch of roast that's kind of drying it out already. It tastes like it's in the right place. It really does. I think this is gonna be nice. I'm excited. Anyway, like I said, this went into the fermenter at like 190 degrees. So I put it into this chest freezer. We set the temperature control for about 68 degrees. So once it hits 68 degrees, that'll probably be like overnight, to be completely honest. Then I'll come back down tomorrow morning. We'll go ahead and we'll just direct pitch our 1 packet of California ale yeast. And it's off to the races from there. All right, so now it's time to talk about the fermentation for this beer. This is actually a relatively simple fermentation, all things considered. There's an old adage out there that says brewers make wort and yeast makes beer. What that really refers to is that you can make a pretty fantastic wort and you could still have it get screwed up in the fermentation and have the beer not be what it could be as a result of that. But you could also make a really not so great wort. You can have a bad brew day, you can be off on your numbers, you can have a whole host of things go wrong, but the fermentation, if it's good and healthy, can oftentimes save that beer and surprise you. The moral of that story is, if you have any sort of investment that you want to make into your overall gear budget, it should really go on the cold side. What that means is the fermentation. And I'll say it again, that does not mean a $1,000 stainless conical with a glycol chiller. It just means some form of fermentation temperature control. In my case, I'm going to be using the Anvil bucket fermenter, and I'm going to be using that in the fermentation fridge and control off of a cheap Inkbird thermostat. It's so simple. I love that setup, and it works incredibly well. But there's a million different ways to control your fermentation temperature. It's not just that one. So I urge you to look at the video that I made a couple months ago on how to get around fermentation temperature control and some different hacks. I think I had like 15 or something different ways to control your fermentation temperature in that video. So check that out for some more options as opposed to just what I'm doing here. Fermentation overall with a good healthy pitch like this in the dry yeast, it's probably gonna take me maybe 10 days, maybe 14 days, we'll see. I'm gonna be fermenting this one at 67 degrees. If it goes up or down a few degrees during that period, it's totally fine. As long as I don't get this one too hot. But basically, I'll just monitor the fermentation, taking somewhat frequent gravity samples towards the end of the fermentation. Once I see that the specific gravity reading is the same several days in a row, I'll know it's ready to be packaged. I'm going to be kegging this beer, but you also can bottle condition it as well if that's what your setup allows you to do. For alternate yeast in this beer, really it's anything that's nice, clean, and reliable fermenting. And so obviously the Chico strain is one of the best candidates for this. Alternative to WLP001, this strain is also available as Fermentis US05, which is a dry yeast, as well as Yeast 1056 and Imperial Flagship, and there's plenty of other brands out there. If you find a good clean American ale strain, it's going to generally be the Chico strain. Alternative to the Chico strain though, might I suggest a lager strain. Even though this is not technically a lager, it really could swing both ways. And if you want to use something like Saf Lager W3470, the Weihenstephan 3470 strain, or a Mexican lager strain, or something that plays nicely with these dark malts without getting the beer sweet, that is not a bad way to pursue this beer. If you have the ability to ferment it a little bit cooler than where you're at now, it's gonna do some pretty good stuff. 3470, of course, can go all the way up to like 68, so if you're already doing, you know, a 68 degree fermentation for the Chico strain, then why not try it with 3470 and see if you can tell a difference. Another good option here would be something like a neutral, fast fermenting Weichyeast like Oslo or Lutra. I just used Lutra in a West Coast IPA, and it was a phenomenal choice for that beer. And I'm not going to go into great detail about it, but there's also nothing wrong with trying out a little bit more of an estery strain for this type of beer. It could be interesting to see what happens, and you know, it might just play well with some of these flavors. But I'll leave that up to you, the brewer. Even though I'm not using my fancy glycol chiller and conical combo, I have zero doubts that this beer is going to turn out great just with the bucket fermentation. So if you've got a plastic bucket with a hole drilled in the bottom for a tap, like, you're going to do just as well. But I'm excited to see what happens in several weeks when this is all done, and I'll catch you then. Until then, cheers. So today is packaging day, and it's been just under 2 weeks. In fact, the 2-week mark in the fermenter will be tomorrow. I just pulled a second final gravity confirmation sample. I saw a steady final gravity of 1008. It's been 1008 now for 3 days straight, so I know it's 100% done fermentation. It's time to put this thing into the package. And in my case, I'm gonna be using a keg. Kegging really is something that I advocate for, and I think that most home brewers really should look into. It's not a necessity by any means, but it does certainly simplify the serving process, and it helps keep your beer fresh a little bit longer. It's really an enormous amount of savings in terms of time and work when it comes to packaging the beer, and you don't need anything too fancy for it. You don't need to go buy a 4-tap kegerator to serve it. You can use a simple picnic tap and put this thing in the fridge or a chest freezer like I've got back here, and it'll do just fine. And what I'm about to show you today is actually a very I would say abbreviated and somewhat lackadaisical process, but that's actually on purpose. Let me explain. So normally when I would keg, I would do a closed transfer for pretty much every single beer style. What a closed transfer means is that when you're taking your beer and transferring from the fermenter into the keg, you're pushing that beer out with CO2. Instead of letting oxygen come into the fermenter, you're actually replacing that space as the beer drops and the volume increases in the fermenter. You're replacing that space with CO2. In the same way, the vessel that you're transferring into is already going to be completely purged with CO2 as well, so there's no oxygen pickup during the entire transfer. This is far and away the best way to package your beer. It's going to result in the longest shelf life and the best overall flavor for your beer. Now, I'm choosing not to do that today because I want to show that it's not 100% necessary. And it's also like, this is a good beer to take a little bit of risk on for a couple reasons. First of all, it's not a particularly oxygen-sensitive beer. It's a dry, malt-forward beer with no dry hopping addition. And number two, this beer is literally described in the BJCP guidelines as designed to be consumed as fresh as possible. The method I'm showing you now, as long as you have a good CO2 purged keg and you're transferring into it with a lot of CO2 still residually in the atmosphere in the keg, honestly, you're gonna do pretty well. You're really not likely to see signs of oxidation for maybe 2, maybe 3 months in this method. And for a beer like this, I don't really expect it to last that long. It's gonna be drunk before that. And to me, that's worth it because it really reduces the amount of time involved in the packaging process. The way I'm gonna do this is a gravity transfer. So I got my fermenter up here on top of my fermentation chamber, and we're gonna just transfer it directly into my keg, which is down here. Now, of course, this is fully sanitized, cleaned, and full of CO2 right now. So the first thing we gotta do is actually pull the pressure relief valve. The CO2 is generally a high concentration in there. We're gonna take this sanitized tube here. It's gonna send all of that liquid down into the keg, filling it from the bottom up. Theoretically, there should be enough CO2 in the keg to prevent any excessive oxygen exposure. And as soon as it's full, we'll go ahead, we'll purge the headspace with some extra CO2 and then start the carbonation process. My intention is to serve this beer within a few days. So I'm gonna go ahead once this is transferred, and I'm gonna put it directly into my kegerator and pressurize it highly. I'm gonna put about 30 PSI of pressure on top of it and get it nice and cold so that gas starts to absorb into the beer. And over the next 3 or 4 days, I should get it up to a nice high carbonation level. So I'm shooting for something around 2.8 to like 3 volumes of CO2. I have no way of confirming or measuring this, but I'm just gonna kind of aim for that higher level, right?
This beer is called my Old Kentucky Brew, and it comes in at 5.5% ABV and 19 IBUs. For the appearance of the beer, it is pouring a beautiful dark brown, ruby, kind of amber color. Just a really, really nice presentation there. It's mostly clear. I'm not too worried about getting perfect clarity in this one, but based on the way it's been going, I think it's actually going to naturally clarify up in the next week or two completely. It's only a few days old at this point. It pours with a really nice cap of cream-colored off-white foam that sticks around for quite a while.
All right, so let's go in for aroma. Aroma on this one's really interesting. So I'm starting out, I'm actually getting a pretty significant like chocolate raisin kind of thing. So it's a little bit roasty, it's a little bit malty. It's a small amount of like a caramel note. It smells like a slight hint of a fruit, like a dark fruit. It's a nice aroma, actually. It smells very inviting. It smells like malty, but not too like sweet, and refreshing. I don't get any corn on the nose. All right, so now let's go in for mouthfeel. The mouthfeel is very light. It's very light bodied in general, but I'm getting a lot of carbonation. Like there is a very lively amount of carbonation in this. It's like borderline soda, borderline sparkling, very highly carbonated. So like it's prickly on the tongue, but then when combined with a light body, really does make it very refreshing, very easy to drink, and overall it's like very, yeah, just very light, which is nice. Despite being very light, despite being very sparkly, there is a little bit of that, yeah, smooth, kind of creamy texture at the end. All right, but now let's go in for flavor. It's just so interesting. Okay, this flavor is so hard to describe. This beer, I understand now why it really is its own style. This is parked somewhere in this like weird middle ground between like a Scottish light, an international dark lager, or an American dark lager, I guess, and like a session brown ale, maybe. It is so hard to pin down, and that's why it specifically is its own thing. It's got very light malt flavors overall. The malt flavors I'm getting, I really think, are most similar to a Scottish ale. It's got that very small contribution of like a light roastiness. There is a small amount of like a smoky effect, and you get that black malt character, which is so interesting. And then there's chocolate bits on there. There's like a nice drying, refreshing kind of chocolatey note there. It's not sweet. And actually, a rather pronounced hop flavor on this one. A little bit of woodiness, a little bit of mintiness. It's almost like Northern Brewer, actually. Not to go down like a rabbit hole here, but like if I used Northern Brewer in this would be closer to like a California common, but whole other thing. But it seems similar to that to me. It's a little earthy. It's a little, got a little small amount of like a grapefruit note. It's certainly got like a nice drying effect to it. That roasted malt really does do that very well, but it's been appropriately balanced. It's not too dry. It's very light bodied, like I said, so that really makes it very easy to drink, very refreshing, despite having interesting dark malt notes. What's so cool about this right now is that it's a hot day out, it's humid, and this is a dark beer, but it's just as refreshing as something like a cream ale or a light lager would be in the same weather. And I'm actually kind of impressed by that. That is a very interesting thing. I can understand why you'd want to drink it young and quickly, and like this, it's got a really nice effect. This is now sat in the keg, I think, for about a week. It's really come into its own. The flavors have all gelled together. When I was younger, there's a little bit more appley kind of notes in there from acetaldehyde, I believe. Small amount of that probably came through from kegging it so quickly, but it did actually metabolize all that out now, and we're looking at a very nice clean yeast presentation. As far as potential improvements for this beer go, honestly, it's kind of hard not having had a reference sample to really suggest any, but if I was going to change one thing, it might just be adding maybe a little bit more of that crystal malt in there to kind of combat some of that drying astringency you can get from the darker roasted malts. The dark malt notes in this are very interesting. I don't think I would add to them at all. Too much more would be a bit astringent, but of course I could counteract that by throwing in those dark malts at the very end of the mash instead, which would definitely suck less astringency out of them and make things a little bit smoother in the presentation. You might get more of like a cooler chocolate kind of note out of that process. But it really does kind of hit the spot right now. So all in all, it's just such an interesting beer style. You know, it's so much fun to brew something that I don't really have a good reference for at all in terms of what to expect. And then, you know, this is what comes out of that, and that's pretty cool. This is, in my opinion, just as good of a beer as would have been produced if I had brewed this on my clawhammer supply system in one of my conicals with a glycol chiller attached to it. Like, this is just as good. I guarantee you, if you try the same beer, the same recipe on a nicer system, it'll come out just as nice. So I will say it one more time just to be 100% explicitly clear. You do not need to use expensive brewing equipment to make excellent beer. Here's the proof. So if you're a new home brewer looking at this video, or you're somebody who's thinking about getting into home brewing, but you haven't taken that step of buying gear yet, I really sincerely hope deep down that this showed you that you don't need all of that high-end stuff that keeps getting shoved down your throats, whether intentionally or not. But I have one thing to ask of all of you who are still watching at this point. If you enjoyed the way that I did this video, whether that is using cheaper equipment or whether it was talking you through the whole process instead of voicing over it, or any other thing that's different than my normal videos, please let me know. Let me know what you enjoyed, let me know what you didn't like also. I really do feel like this is not gonna be the last time I use this equipment to make beer with, so let me know in the comments as well, what do you think I should make next with this system? And also, please don't forget to hit the like button. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. These things are very, very important for keeping this channel relevant to the rest of the brewing community and YouTube at large. If you want to support the channel, please consider picking up a t-shirt like this one or the glassware that I used in this video. It's also on the merchandise store. All that stuff is available in the link in the description box. It'll take you over to my fourth wall shop. There's also a Patreon, and the patrons, honestly, you guys are the #1 supporters of this channel. You are literally funding a lot of what I'm doing here. You guys are helping fund the production quality improvements for this channel, and you're helping fund getting things like that system and the equipment that I use to make beer with in this video itself. So you guys are helping so much. And my gratitude is never ending for that. So thank you, thank you, thank you, patrons. If Patreon is not your thing, there's also channel memberships and the super thanks button, both of which are quick and easy ways to help support me as well. You can find those below the video itself. There's also an Amazon store, and my Amazon store is where you can find the channel production equipment as well as a lot of the brewing equipment. I'm not sure if everything I use in this video is on Amazon, but if it is, I'll go ahead and update that store so you can see what I'm working with here. But also, please consider checking me out on Instagram and Facebook as well, where you can find more frequent content updates. You can get to see what's going to be coming to the channel in the relatively near future. There's really just a lot of fun stuff to find on those socials, so please feel free to follow me there, hit me up with a message. Anyway, guys, if you are still watching at this point, thank you very much for sticking around for the whole video. It means a lot to me, it means you got a lot out of it, and really that's what I want, is when I want this channel to be educational and useful for those of you who are watching. So therefore, this one goes out to you. And until the next one, cheers.